Okay, guidepost for February 9th coming up. So last week we got to talking about mind, and something that came out of that for me was the whole question of what matters. And this is something that's arisen for me from a number of quarters. So I want to talk about how do we know what matters? And in the most fundamental level, what matters is what I choose to make matter. It's a choice that I make. What am I going to pay attention to? At any given moment, there are gazillions of things that are arising in my field of vision, and I can't pay attention to all of them. So part of what my brain does is it decides what it is that matters. I think I've shared with some of you at some point that there was a time a few years back when suddenly my left eye clouded up and I couldn't see clearly out of it. I mean, what I could see clearly, but there was something in the way. And when I got to my ophthalmologist, she said, "Oh yeah, you have what we call floaters." And I said, "What can we do about that?" She says, "Well, let's wait and see what happens. You know, is there some kind of surgery or something?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Yeah, but it's not always that effective, and there's downsides. Let's just see what happens." So I was back 6 months later, and it had substantially cleared up. It was already starting to clear up a bit. And I said, "Oh, so they must have gone away." She said, "No, they're still there." I said, "What do you mean? I can see relatively well. I can see this cloudy stuff come by." She says, "Yeah, it's still there, but your brain doesn't see those. It sees what you need to see." It's like one of this. As part of this is evidence of how much we don't perceive what's real. We perceive what our brain tells us is real. Because the floaters are still there. I trust her. She's not lying about that. They really are there. And I don't see them. I mean, if I move my eye a little bit, yeah, I can kind of see a little like a shadow that moves. Uh, but I can see fine, right? My brain knows to not pay attention to those things. It pays attention to the things that matter. So what matters? Given that we have all of this stuff arising all the time, what am I going to choose to see because in some sense it matters to me? Well, things matter to me in a large part because there's something I can do about them. I don't want to spend a lot of, bandwidth paying attention to things that I can't do anything about anyway. Although we do really worry. We spend a lot of time and energy thinking about things we can't do anything about, but I want to minimize that. So part of this is we want to look at what is it that we experience having the power to do. So I want to talk a little bit about power as it relates to our decision about what it is that matters. And I want to suggest to you that there are three kinds of power. There's power over, power with, and empowerment. And I'm going to tease those apart for us. And again, the question here is, do I know that I have power and thus choosing to pay attention to any given thing matters to me because of my capacity to have power? And a client just the other day was telling me this story. It fit in perfectly around this question of matter because he used to be a high school teacher and teaching math and physics, and there was this one particular thing that would come up. I do look forward to telling the class about this, about the notion of power or work. In terms of physics, I think this is probably Isaac Newton was one of the things he came up with, was that power or work is the product of how much force you use and how much things change. So if I'm going to smack a nail with a hammer, how far is the nail going to go into the wood based upon how much force I apply to it is a measure of how much work I do. So the more force I apply and the more change that happens, the more work that I've done. Now, if you really want to be efficient, you use very little force and you make a big change. But he said, he was talking to his students, he said, if you put a huge amount of force into changing something, you're going to press against something really hard and you have a lot of different force and it doesn't move, how much work did you do? You got a big force, no change, big number multiplied by zero is zero, right? Nothing changes. I didn't do any work. I don't have any power. It's evidence that I'm powerless if nothing changes. And so one of the things we do is we talk ourselves out of letting something matter because we don't see that anything changed. the more I know that, oh, there's something happened, there's something changed here, the more power I believe I have. And so thus the more I think that it's going to, this is why when people are doing fundraising, they show you pictures of the dogs or of the people or of the whatever. This is what, your dollars can make this happen. We want you to see the power that you have so that you will join us by giving us, donating to our cause. So power over, that is the ability for me to make a choice that changes something else. That's power over. Comes from me, causes something outside of me. That's power over somebody else. I know I have power over the pickle jar when I can get the lid off. If I can't get the lid off, I get really frustrated because I'm powerless. So mostly that's what we think of when we're talking about power, is the capacity to get something else, something outside of me, other than me, to change. There's a second kind of power, which is power with. Power with is when two or more of us have an agreement that we're going to do something that has power over something else. So I may say, I can't move this sofa by myself. I need somebody to help me. But the two of us, we each get one end of it, and we can do together what neither of us can do individually. So quite observably, power with is more powerful than power over. So we join with others into a community that has a particular activity, or we share in a concern. What is especially powerful is when the thing that you and I are changing, because we're going to work together on it, is the relationship that we have to each other. So what I have come to call mutual accountability is a very powerful way of being with each other. So power over is when I change something else. Power with is when we change something else. And empowerment is when we change ourselves. That's when I'm going to do what I can do to make me be different, such that I'm going to create more of what it is that I need. When I was a little kid, I thought shoes were a real bother. And my dad always wanted, when I was going to play outside, he wanted me to have shoes on. He's bigger than me, so he'd grab me and put my shoes on and say, okay, now go play. So I didn't see the sense of it. I just thought they were getting in the way, until one day when I was out playing barefoot, I chased the ball across the gravel driveway. And I discovered, wow, it'd sure be nice to have some shoes on right now. So at that point, things shifted. So instead of him having power over me and making me wear shoes, he and I now had an agreement that we wanted Mark to have shoes on. So this was power with. And because he wanted me to be empowered when it comes to putting on shoes, he taught me how to put on my shoes, how to get socks on the right feet. And socks are easy. Shoes, however, though they look very similar, they are actually different. So I have to get them on the right foot, how to tie them, how to get them so they stay tied. So I am proud to tell you that I am now empowered when it comes to putting on shoes. So I have that form of power, and because I have these kinds of powers, power over, power with, and empowerment, I can choose what to pay attention to so that I am getting the right data in order to be able to do the things that will actually make things work for me. So I'm paying attention to what it is that matters. All right? So I saw a link the other day for a New York Times article about how when in slaughtering hogs, one of the more commonly used things now is that they get asphyxiated with carbon dioxide. They're kind of stunned that way, so that they're unconscious when they're actually killed, as a more humane way of killing hogs. The problem is that asphyxiation, is terrifying, and so the hogs aren't, while they're not physically feeling pain, they're certainly scared because they can't breathe. So I noticed that having read that article did not change the fact that Joan and I had grilled pork tenderloin for dinner. Right? Some people looking at that say, "Oh well, this matters to me in such a way that I'm going to change my behavior." So it becomes a question of what am I going to pay attention to? because of how it is that this matters, right? So we are all free to decide what it is that matters. What am I going to let in? What am I going to keep out? And can I notice that there are things that are really quite subtle that do in fact inform how I behave? Because, and this is a principle we'll dig into a bit more deeply, is that sometimes very small changes, particularly if there are small changes that happen in a lot of people, but even a small change for one person can make a huge difference. So we're not actually able to know fully what matters because we don't know what are the consequences of the small changes that we make. For that reason, it makes sense that we want to pay attention to as many things as possible. Recognize that we can't pay attention to everything. Final point. I'm talking about what I decide matters to me. For many of us, we grew up knowing that we mattered because people around us said, well, you matter. We knew that we were important. When I have not been treated, and all of us at some time have been treated as though we don't matter. I mean, I got stuff going on in my life right now where people treat me like I don't matter. And that really irks me. If we never felt like we mattered, it's very hard for us to become adults who then believe that we matter and thus treat ourselves as though we matter. And if I become someone who believes that my choices don't matter, I end up behaving in a way that doesn't take into account the power that I have. And thus I'm dangerous. So it really is important that everyone know that they matter for the well-being of the whole society. Okay, I hope this gives us plenty to talk about on Thursday evening as we look at what matters to us, why does that matter, what are the ways in which we think we have power, what are the ways in which we think we don't have power, and maybe do. Okay? Hope you join us.